Pastores, dabo, vobis, wrote St. John Paul II, I will give you shepherds after my own heart, a teaching which was given to us as a basic one in spirituality there in Rome, a model, a blueprint for the priest after God's heart, the person who went after the soul. The soul. Our life is about the soul. It is one thing to spend one's priestly life organizing well things that have to happen. It is another to go into a soul, to invest in a soul, as though that soul were the only one in the universe, the only one for which the Saviour died, for he would have, even for one. The hungry sheep look up, said Milton, and are not fed. This is the memorial of a great priest, truly after God's heart. He was Saint Jean Eudes in the C diocese, which was the diocese that I was living in for a while in France and at La Trappe, and he left his imprint on the area, schools and congregations. The Sisters of the Good Shepherd, initially there brought into being to rescue women in mortal danger. And then these priests, he grouped them together. He himself had worked for many years as a missionary. Now he is living not long after the great thrust of renewal that came from the Council of Trent. He was born in 1601. But he was a bright light in the incipient École Française, the French school, which left a whole corpus of very dense spiritual literature, priestly literature, monastic literature. You have the likes of Monsieur Olier, who founded the Sulpicians, who were responsible for the education of priests and formed very good priests and very good bishops. We have the likes of Bossuet, great preacher, Fenelon, another one. And by the way, Bossuet was a personal friend of l'Abbé de Rancé, or Rancé as he was at the time, at La Sorbonne. One became first and one the second in their ear. They were very intellectual. But his friend, l'Abbé Rancé, had a great conversion and took seriously the fact that he was commendatory abbot of La Trappe and reformed it completely. And others too. We have the oratory coming into France, and that was a powerful school of spirituality in the heart of Paris. We have also in parallel the monastic thrust, the great corpus of literature coming from the likes of Prosper Gueranger and Delatte, abbots, powerful writers, men of God, who understood the powerful dynamics that they were handling, creating beauty and handing on spirituality, filtering the best of the desert. It works. And we secretly know that if we want to see the most dense concentration of monastic life, aware of its roots, it's actually, at least in the West, towards France that one tends to look. Things were always taken seriously there, in that field. And it is interesting that in the renewal, in the wake of the Second Vatican Council, they did apply in a serious way in many places what was possible with regard to true renewal without destroying. That is, much was lost, but much was also gained, in the sense that already, very early after the Council, one could see that they wanted to produce something serious. And I remember very soon after the council finding that in France, different from England, every celebration practically on a Saturday evening through to Sunday evening would last a full hour and would be fully sung. And they had different means of doing it. They had the celebrant and then either a second priest or a very good layperson, making sure that everyone sang. It was a celebration. And I noticed the quality of preaching also was looked after. In fact, I was influenced by sermons heard at that time. They were powerful sermons. It was a French tradition that the sermon was a whole art. And even young priests had it, I noticed. It would last a quarter of an hour, 20 minutes, and it was well prepared and well delivered. It was something they still had, and they still actually have when it's done properly. And the Lord, when He finds open channels, is not short of blessing. I noticed some time ago, it was pointed out to me by somebody that there was a sign of this nature in recent times. It was at Lourdes, and many bishops were there, and many, many priests. And in the Basilique de Saint-Pédis, there was that underground basilica in Lourdes. They were there by the hundred. And as they can do, they did celebrate with great dignity the sacred mysteries. And as they do in France, they, from the epiclesis to the last part, which is celebrated together, said together by the concelebrants, they go into chant, very serene, gentle, noble, elevated chant, universally known throughout France and the French-speaking countries. And the organ then also, as it did then, can come in with very gentle effect, not drowning, but just giving that atmosphere. And it was powerful, and it could be seen on YouTube under the title of Eucharistic Miracle. And what happened was this: the Lord was indicating discreetly that He was pleased with this authentic renewal in which He was being honoured by the means that we have, and not being treated shoddily, as unfortunately has happened in some places where it has not been properly understood. And we have one of the bishops there, who is the main celebrant, who goes into mode, and we see the consecration happening. This very large host is elevated with great dignity, all in an atmosphere of organ and chant. And then we see this coming. The large paten does not touch the altar. For the whole duration of the Eucharistic prayer after the consecration, one can see quite clearly, and it's captured on YouTube, that the large paten is levitating, it's off the altar, discreetly indicating that the Lord is accepting this honour and praise given to Him, to His body, and that He wants to be honoured with care, and He doesn't want the shoddy. This was already understood perfectly well by these great men in the École Française. And I remember how I was pleasantly surprised in those earlier years in France when comparing the monastic libraries that one was confronted with the equivalent in one of the countries that has had the Protestant Reformation, Great Britain and so on. One saw that in France there had not been that discontinuity and break. What happened in England was this: for a long time our best writers had to handle apologetics against Anglicans and so on. Whereas in France they had better things to do. They went into great depth, and they created this whole French school of spirituality, which is very useful if one is preaching a retreat in France to monks and nuns. It's a heavy artillery that one can engage in and use to fire great blows. Great writing and great depth, things understood and put down well. Our own heritage, therefore, not having to spend much energy at brass tacks trying to handle basic truths against error. with regard to what the Lord wants in his priest, there was in France that great movement of preparing good priests through an order founded especially for that, the Sulpicians, the Sulpicians, based at Saint-Sulpice, which by the way recently was put on fire. And they did not spare anything with regard to forming a holy priest who would be aware of what he was, his great dignity. It gave the Church a great force in France. Where there's a holy shepherd, there will be a holy flock. That actually, strangely enough, was commented on by Geoffrey Chaucer in the Middle Ages in England. And it's interesting that one of the greatest ones in his vignettes of people on the way to Canterbury in the Canterbury Tales is the poor parson of a town, the poor parson of a town, who was thin as a rake, but he was a true pastor. And he comments on those who are not. That applies to us, and also to what we can lose. If we do not prepare our sermon, if we do not give knowledge that is both true and demanding out of shyness, then the sheep will not be fed. If also we do not have time for the individual soul, but prefer to remain behind a computer for long periods of time, when we don't have to, then the flock will not be brought to that degree of sanctity that it could be and potentially should be. I heard from an Anglican friend who is now an Anglican clergyman like his father that somebody was giving a retreat to Anglican clergy years ago. He had been present at it, and may have been a bishop. He was somebody who was able well to challenge his priests anyway, and he muttered this while giving this retreat: the Anglican Church, the trouble with the Anglican Church is it has foot and mouth disease. Foot and mouth disease. It can't visit and it can't preach. That says it all. If we can't have time for the soul in pain, in his house, in his hospital bed, in his sin, but have time for many emails and YouTubes, then we can be asked, are we true pastors of souls? And if we cannot give them what they need as hungry sheep for the nourishment of their souls on a Sunday and also on a weekday, why are we so busy that we haven't time for what one day will be severely judged upon? Caritas in